What's up, brother? This is your brother G World, and I couldn't find the book of Van Sermons in the pile of heap, but I find it. Here's a book, The Polynesian Prehistory of an Island People. Okay, I'm going to go to the second chapter. Second chapter is the third chapter. I'm going to the second chapter. Here it is. The Polynesian peoples and their culture. The accounts provided by the European explorers in the Pacific enable us to give a fairly full description of the Polynesians and their society in the late 18th century. Indeed, many aspects of prehistory Polynesian life still survives today, and this is particularly true of the languages. The peoples themselves have changed through intermarriage with outsiders, and their cultures have, of course, adapted in many ways to the modern world to which they now belong. Nevertheless, Polynesia still retains much of their allure and charm which first attracted Europeans 200 years ago. The Polynesian people. Recent archaeological work has shown that New Guinea and Australia were settled about 30 to 40,000 years ago, almost certainly by dark-skinned Australoid populations ancestral to the present Melanesians and Australian Aborigines. The island of the Philippines and Indonesia were also once settled by these Australoid, and in western Indonesia they may well have a very long ancestry going back to the times of the Homo erectus over 1 million years ago. The Australoids are in fact the true indigenes of Indonesia and the Western Pacific, and until some 7,000 years ago, the islands east of the Bismarck Archipelago, or perhaps even east of New Guinea itself, were quite possibly uninhabited. Now right there they're telling you that the original people there were black. Remember, Melanesian, Micronesian, Polynesian. Melanesian means black, Polynesian means many, Micronesian means small. All those are different categories that the white man did to basically define the indigenous black populations of their regions. All right, them other people there now are Mongoloid people. The original so-called Mongoloid people, remember I told you those features come from the Khoisan, which is in South Africa and Botswana. You see them, they migrated out into different regions. So they still had that yellowish skin complexion to their brown skin. But it was an intermixtion between them and pale people that created the modern day paler Asiatic, who were not the original Mongoloids that coming into America. The original Mongoloids in America were of darker hue and had woolly hair. All right, I'm going to go on and read. The Polynesians are members of the Mongoloid division of mankind, and as such have a unique ultimate origin rather separate from the Australoids, whatever. The Mongoloids may have been expanded from the Southeast Asian mainland into Indonesia throughout the Holocene epoch. The majority of the Indonesians and Filipinos are certainly Mongoloid today, although there are isolated populations in these countries who do preserve traces of a much more ancient Australoid heritage. This is especially true of the Negritos of Malaya, the Andaman Islands, and the Philippines. There's a small amount of skeletal evidence from Indonesia and the Philippines, which also supports this hypothesis of recent Mongoloid expansion. Stop right there real quick. I'm going to show you some images of Samoa. You see these are Negroes. See them, look at that little short little afro. A lot of them have been really heavily mixed now. That's why you see, like the rock mother, you can tell she was a Negro, Asian, and Caucasian mix. That's what a lot of those Polynesians are. All right, the original, like I said, the original people of those lands were all black. It's not even up for debate. That was a total black belt going from India all the way over to Australia. That was another branch of Negroes. Remember, you had the Kushitic Empire over in India. That's why you get the terminology when you go further north. You got the Hindu Kush region in remembrance of the Kushites who was in that region. All right. But you really have to understand. I've been studying this for years, but you really have to understand that what these white scholars have done is carved and chopped up our history and broken up in many different parts and pieces. If you know, these people were they had a maritime culture. What I mean by that is they sailed the sea. They knew how to sail the sea. They had certain boats that did fishing, and they had certain boats that they traveled, did deep sea travel, and they're able to travel around the world. This is nothing new, but this is something that we really got to study. I'm going to go further on. By about 3000 BC, some of these Mongoloid peoples began to expand into Melanesia. At the present state of research, it is uncertain whether the Australian population of Melanesia had already occupied the islands beyond New Guinea to as far as the New Hebrides and New Caledonia. Although I strongly suspect this to be the case, most of the Melanesians show few traces of any substantial intermarriage with Mongoloids. This may be because they had already settled their islands, with the exception of Fiji, with a quite large population who were able to resist a high degree of Mongolian genetic influence. Nevertheless, certain populations in coastal Papua New Guinea and New Hebrides do have what appears to be a high proportion of Polynesian characteristics, and the overall situation was certainly more complicated than can be indicated here. Now, these white folks get to explaining things, man. What you need to understand when you study this history is that dark-skinned people were indigenous to this planet, period. All right. You had different tribes who broke off and settled different areas in different regions. These weren't different races. And what white scholars do to try to make a different race now, those so-called Negro people that you still find in the Philippines, Indonesia, they go by various different names. But a lot of these scholars just call them Negrito people. A lot of them are like deep in the forest, and they still practice their own ancient traditional culture. I showed that in one of my books dealing with the Philippines. And this is basically, they just explain and tell you this now right here in this book. And them Negroes rock the fro. All right, black folks don't come in one type of hair. They come in like various different hair textures. Wavy to straight to woolly. All right, so we come in various different hair textures and different skin complexions without having a white admixture. But unfortunately, so many of us don't understand that. We believe that we're just slaves from Africa, when most of us were brought over here from Africa on the slave ship. And I'm going to say that over and over again. America had a multiple mixture of very different black groups here who sailed the world. And these black people here were a maritime people. You still have black people in Australia, certain groups who still sail the seas going fishing. And a lot of these brothers and sisters had different types of boats for different circumstances. There's another Negro, and there's another Negro that was in the Pacific Islands. This is a Moai chief. All right, a lot of those people there. You look at them, nothing but mulattoes, man. Nothing but mulattoes. And I read this: the Polynesians themselves were also affected by intermarriage with Melanesians. Okay, the Polynesians were originally melanated people. And this has led to several changes in physical characteristics away from Southeast Asian norms. The Polynesians, as well as many Melanesians, are quite tall and heavily built. The Mongoloid trait of light skin, straight black hair, relative scarcity of body hair, and fairly high frequencies of shovel-shaped and scissor teeth, and the epicantic or Mongoloid eye fold are all well marked in Polynesians, but there are many individual darker skins and wavy or curly hair who approximate more to the Melanesian phenotype. In the average Polynesian village, one would see a range of phenotypes from strongly Mongoloid to partially Melanesian, although today the picture is somewhat masked by 200 years of intermarriage with Europeans and other outsiders. And these people originally were black people. Explain in so many words that they were originally black people. And remember I said that those epicantic folded eyes, originally you see them people with the coil sand in southern Africa. They had those original images, man. And it was a mixture of them and so-called white folks produced the pale Mongoloid of the day. That pale Mongoloid was not original people who came to the Americas. The original Mongoloids were dark-skinned people with woolly hair. These fools don't teach you this. He said it in so many words, man, and then you say it, and then he try to explain away and break them up into different groups. That's what these white devils do, and unfortunately, some of our people are stupid enough to believe what they say. And this is some years of studying I've done, man. Information, years of studying this. I'm saying this information is right in front of your face, but you got to research it. This is obviously a Negro. All right, and these are obviously some Negroes, especially you see these dudes, man. This is obvious, but when you've been brainwashed and told that you're just a slave from Africa, this is all you're gonna believe in. All right, and remember, Hawaii is a Polynesian island. I'll show you images before of Hawaiians. They were Negroes. The original Hawaiians were Negroes. They were not white, but remember they're Polynesian islands. You see the tricks that they play? Fiji, is a Melanesian island. And in Fiji, you have two types of blacks. You have the Aboriginal Melanesian black, and you have the Indian blacks. With Vijay Singh, the golfer, is that he's a black Melanesian Fijian. I'm correct. No, he's a black Indian Melanesian Fijian. He's a black Indian Fijian. He's a Negro. All right, but these white scholars, what they do, like I said, they'll break different black groups and give these different categories, different names, you know, and when they're all black. And some of them they cannot deny it, because you look at the Andaman Islands, those are straight up Negroes. The Andaman Islands were some jet black, short, dark-skinned Negroes with woolly hair. And you look sometimes the Negroes look like a short version of the Negroes you see in the Sudan, which means land of the blacks. But my main emphasis and point here is you got to continue to do your research. If you don't do your research, you remain ignorant. And I want to get that book with Van Sertima. I have it somewhere, when it talks about how the original Americans were different branches of Negroes that were here. And all this stuff ties together when regarding our history. So when you hear these stupid Negroes tell you descended of African slaves, that most black people came over in a slave ship, that is not accurate. That is wrong information. You know? And it's something that we're going to have to wake up to. But this information I'm giving, this is some information that's needed. And it's from this book, Peter Bellwood, The Polynesians, a Pre-History of an Island People. And you see a little Negro statue in the front. The features are so obvious. And a little grass skirt. What you see a lot of the Aboriginal blacks, when you know images of the Moors, not Moors, the Aboriginal Indians who you find in Virginia, a lot of them had this grass skirt. Some of them were smoking tobacco, which is native to the Americas, which the Egyptian pharaohs had cocaine. They had cocaine in their system, and that's the Americas, but particularly South America. So there's a connection to South America and Africa, because they were connected to each other at one point, but once they broke off, brothers and sisters were just selling to the two lands. Like I said before, South America and North America was Upper Egypt, all right, and then Lower Egypt was Africa. All right, you have to understand the dynamics of this, man. Is that Egypt wasn't just in northwest or northeastern Africa. Egypt was here in the Americas. And those continents broke off, or they started to distance itself much later than what these cracker scholars are telling you. All right, so this is some good information. But it deals with the Polynesian. I have told you the other book with the Melanesian brothers and sisters, showing you the ones in the Philippines were Negroes. These are Negroes right here. Like I said, the Polynesian is just a name for many islands. A Micronesian name for small islands. Melanesia is a name for black islands. All those are really melanated people. When I say melanated people, I'm talking about black people. I'm not talking about no Asians, because everyone has melanin in them. But when you think of melanated, you think of black people. And unfortunately, some Negroes online will keep calling these other people melanated, and they're not. All right, well, they have melanated skin, but when you think of a melanated person, a true melanated person, it's a black person. This information is in this book. This is one of these academic books. The Polynesians' Prehistory of an Island People. And like I said, when most of these white scholars, they start crack explaining, tell you one thing and they deviate to something else. But you got to tie this information together. The reason I'm bringing this up because the black empires traveled the world. If you notice, there's a similarity to the black civilizations, Asia, the Americas, Africa, and you had the black nobility who ruled Europe. Europe was ruled by black people. You gotta understand that the people who ruled Europe were black people. Part of their downfall, they started to miscegenate with paler-skinned people, the so-called cave beasts. Now, many of them were expelled into America and they mixed in with the Aboriginal blacks here in America. That's where you had black Asians here in America. You so-called black Mongoloid people, and you have to understand that these were all black people, different groups of black people. These weren't white people. And it took me, I knew this for years, but it really took me even longer to really tie in all this stuff. This information is old, it's not new. But you're going to have to do the research. And this is, like I said, this is obviously a Negro, man. And then you got them images of Easter Island. You see those Negroes. I think some of them heads destroyed to some degree, partially destroyed through a person did some arson up thing over there in Easter Island. Purposely did arson over in that region, man. So that's how sick. These bastards do anything to deny the true history. This is our history, and this is our culture, and we need to get our true history back. We weren't just slaves from Africa because most of us was already here. All right? And we don't need no approval from some African to tell us who we are. And they up there making museums about slavery, which is a joke. Most of our ancestors were here. Some of our ancestors fought on the side of the British for, some of our ancestors fought on the side of the British and then ended up going to Canada, while some fought on the other side. All right, so our ancestors been here. We weren't brought over here in those ships from Africa. You got to remember, I also said the sail to the Atlantic was very tumultuous. And lots of times the stories, they give you a bunch of slaves packed up in a ship like that coming through the Atlantic. That wouldn't have happened. A ship would have probably turned over and sunk. Because the Atlantic was a lot of people were afraid to sail through the Atlantic because all of the myths and the things they were saying about the Atlantic, how it's hard to sail. But the calm waters were the Pacific. That's why you had a lot of those blacks came to the Pacific and built over in California. That's why you have a Timbuktu in California, as well you have a Timbuktu in Africa. And they sailed to sea. That's why you have all those mounds and those structures are near large bodies of water that stood there today, or some of them have basically disappeared because they dried up. Right? So you have a Timbuktu, the Mali over in California, and you have the Anasazi, which was the Mali. These were all Negroes. They were the Mali were the Anasazi, and they abandoned that region, like I said before, during the drying up of the region, and as well as many invasions. But they built it so high in these cliffs that it was tough to invade them. But when your lifeline dries up, the water, like I also mentioned with the Sahara, when that dry up, then you have to go somewhere else. You have to migrate somewhere else to where that lifeline, that ancient highway to travel by boat, where you can trade and you do your fishing, was easily accessible to get in and out. When you can't do that, you have to abandon that other place. So a lot of other places were abandoned. But it's very important for us to identify with being Aboriginal Black Americans, due to the fact is that when you say that you're African, I say this over and over again in these videos, you're saying that you're a foreigner. When we're not foreigners, those Africans come from Africa, they are foreigners. We're not foreigners. And we've been here longer than 1619. So I want to emphasize that. I always said we're a mixture of Aboriginal blacks, Black Europeans, and black Asiatics and a few Africans were brought over as slaves. But this is our land. And there wasn't that many African slaves brought there, so basically they were absorbed by the greater black population that was here. So we got to understand and grasp that. All right. I'm going to finish this video now. I'm going to try to find my Van Sertima book, because he talks about that. Them coons like I'm a Willie Africa, who goes around claiming that there weren't no black people in the early America, man. That's a dumbass who don't know what he's talking about. But I'm not going to bring out more videos, and I can see if I can find it. A book by Dr. Van Sertima by Transaction Books. And it's a follow-up, like I said, from They Came Before Columbus, which is by Random House. And all his books covers, I think the cover designs were done by Jacqueline Van Sertima, his wife. All right, brothers and sisters.